So first thing up will be a presentation from Professor Martin Thuner from Lund University. Martin is the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Engineering at Lund University, where he's responsible for internationalization. He's also a full professor at the Division of Combustion Engines and has a PhD in combustion physics. His research mostly focuses on combustion engines and fuels, looking at various ways to get the highest possible efficiency and the lowest possible emissions from that. And that's typically done in collaboration with engine companies. He supervised over 20 PhD students and authored over 100 papers. And very interestingly, he was also the founder of the Lund Energy Seminars, and actually the first one back in 2015 was on methanol as fuel and energy storage. So I think a very knowledgeable speaker on this topic. And with that, Martin, I invite you to the floor for your presentation.
Thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, that first methanol seminar we had 5 years ago, we also had Sebastian as a speaker at that time, so that was actually quite great, I would say. So, hello everyone, hope you are all well out there in the world. My name is Martin Thuner, I come from the Energy Sciences at Lund University, and the title of this talk is Findings from Concluded Methanol Projects. It is quite a technical presentation focusing on methanol engines, so a number of slides with quite a lot of different information, but they are for your reference, so you can revisit those and find links to more detailed information. And as we are aware of, the last decade has the interest for methanol engines and methanol vessels and transportation increased quite a lot. And the picture you see, or the slide here you see, is a number of different projects increasingly over the decade. And I will not report back from all of these different projects. That would take too much time. So I will focus on the MOTE 2030 project, the SUMMETH project, discuss a little bit about the conversion of the Scania Germanica and some other projects as well. And this methanol interest is not something that is unique to Sweden. We can see a lot of different activities in many different countries in the world. So I come from Lund University, and the pictures you see here is from our engine laboratory. The center picture shows the outside of that. We have 13 different test cells for engines. And to the lower left, you can see a Wärtsilä engine that is placed in our basement. And the other engines you can see in the pictures here are heavy-duty engines from Volvo and Scania. And to the lower right side, you can see a glass piston. And that is part of our expertise. We work with looking into the combustion chamber and know and learn about how the different combustion concepts work, and to develop even more efficient and clean engines. So all of these engines that you can see on these pictures are available as optical engines. There are 5 important methanol properties that I would like you to remember. The first one is what Sebastian already touched upon, that it is a simple molecule that allows many different types of feedstocks, and that makes it a realistic, scalable and sustainable option to replace oil. One of the best options, I think. It is liquid, and that makes storage and distribution convenient, but also it makes it convenient from an engine perspective with the fueling systems. There's a high heat of vaporization and high ignition resistance for this fuel. And that can be exploited for higher engine efficiency and higher power, but also to reduce the emissions from the engine. And the molecule itself doesn't contain any carbon-carbon bonds, and the attached oxygen atom leads to no soot production at all. And for me and for so many others, I think the Scania Germanica is really a milestone, showing the way this is really possible. And it's a very clever retrofit solution. Dual direct injection, you have methanol, and then you have a small pilot injection of diesel to make sure to ignite the methanol fuel. This has been in operation for a couple of years, and there are strong reductions of sulfur oxides emissions, NOx, soot as well, and it demonstrates a path for fully sustainable operation when the methanol is fully sustainable itself. There are some other added benefits. From a toxicity perspective, methanol is much better than diesel or gasoline if it comes into water. So there's a largely reduced risk for water life by having methanol. And another thing that was told to me by the technicians on board on Scania Germanica is that it leads to cleaner and cooler engine rooms because you don't need to heat up the heavy fuel oil. Methanol can be used in quite a different number of combustion engine strategies. And you see a bar that goes from orange to blue, from left to right, and that represents the reactivity of the fuel. So if it's orange, it's hard to ignite. And to the left, you can see that gasoline is such a fuel, hard to ignite. So we need to have a spark in the engine, so a spark plug, to make sure that we have positive combustion. Methanol is very similar to gasoline in this respect, so it's not surprising that historically gasoline engines with spark plugs have been converted for methanol operation. On the other side of the scale, we find the so-called DICI in blue. That is the conventional diesel engine, and you can actually use methanol also in that type of engine system. But now you need to modify the methanol by adding ignition improvers, and then you get the fuel that is known as MD95. There's a number of research concepts that we're working with. There's something called RCCI, Reactivity Controlled Compression Ignition, that uses two fuel, for instance methanol and diesel, in different proportions to make sure that you have the highest efficiency and lowest emissions during all working conditions. The hardware for this requires two different fueling systems, obviously since it's two fuels, and it's the same hardware as you use for regular dual fuel engines. But here, Scania Germanica and Wärtsilä, they were really clever when they implemented this on their already existing Scania Germanica ship. So they put all this fuel injection in the same injector. So they replaced the diesel fuel injector by this dual fuel injector. So direct injection of both fuels. Very clever design. In Lund, we've been working with something called partially premixed combustion that can exploit fuels with lower ignition reactivity. Lean burn, so very efficient. And if we combine the PPC with the spark plug, we get something that is known as DICI, direct injected spark ignited. And if you run that lean, you can also have very high efficiencies and very clean operation as well. The SUMMETH project was about a conversion of a Swedish road ferry to methanol operation, and that project contained a lot of different activities. I'm not going to report back on all of these activities, but rather focus on the engine activities in that project. And some of the lessons learned in the SUMMETH project was also carried over into the Green Pilot project. I will start with the MD95 concept. And Scania is currently selling trucks using a fuel called ED95. That's an ethanol-based fuel. So that is commercially available. You can buy these trucks. And VTT in Finland, they took such an engine and they fed it with a methanol-based fuel, MD95, which is similar to the ethanol-based ED95 fuel. And they reported that these blends were burning clean. There was low aldehyde emissions, particulates are liquid type or originated from the additives and assumably removable by oxidation catalyst. And the performance is very similar between MD95 fuel and ED95 fuel, and actually similar to the diesel operation of the base engine. If you want to know more about this, you should read a paper by Päivi Akko-Saksa. And you find the references down low on each of these slides. Scandinavians, they worked on conversion of a Scania D13 engine, and it's a very clever way it was a great work they did on this conversion. So installing spark plugs, installing port fuel injector, PFI, port fuel injection, and that's a very simple and well-known technology for gasoline engines and also traditional methanol type engines. And the results were really encouraging. It complies with present and upcoming EU and IMO regulations without any aftertreatment. The PM is extremely low. At Lund University, we worked with a more advanced concept, and you can see to the picture on the upper right that we had to modify cylinder heads by installing spark plugs and additional injectors and so forth. The benefit of using direct injection is that we can have higher pressure. And with the spark plug and methanol, then we had a proof of concept. This system leads ultimately to higher efficiency and lower emissions compared to the PFI SI engine. You can run it stratified and leads to very high efficiencies, as you can see on the figure to the lower right. Stoichiometric operation is also possible, and you can use a three-way catalyst and have really ultra-low emissions. We also been working with a project called the Sun Fuels, and sponsored by KAUST in Saudi Arabia. And Chalmers University, they worked on the RCCI concept, methanol with diesel. And you can see the combustion chamber of the Volvo TD13 engine they were using on the upper right figure. You see there's 2 different injectors there. And there was lessons learned by the importance of injector performance and placement from their work. Aalto University, they were focusing on a direct injection of dual fuel, similar to the Stena Germanica and Wärtsilä engine that was used for that. Very impressive work. They designed a completely new cylinder head, and they also manufactured it and put in the injectors. And the early experiments show that early fuel injection has advantages for high engine load, combustion stability, and reduced emissions. So great work from them. At Lund University, we continue on the DICI concept using 100% methanol, and we were focusing on the strategies for low load operations. So 1 bar is essentially possible with split injection, so a bit special injection strategies and essentially down to idling conditions. So good results there. We focus a lot of our efforts into creating advanced combustion models for the methanol DICI conditions. And that is what you see on the lower right figure. There's a subset of 6 different figures. These models are very important to explain the complexity of the interaction between fuel spray, spark, and flame propagation. And in those figures, you can see the green X, which marks the ignition site, and then how the fuel propagates. Or I should say combustion propagates. In Lund, we also work with the MOT 2030 project, 100% methanol in advanced combustion engines. And we had 4 PhD students working on this, so doing engine experiments, optical diagnostics, advanced modeling, and system analysis, and in close collaboration with the different companies that were involved in this project, the Volvo companies, Scania, Stena, and Wärtsilä. I'm not going to present all the results. We produced about 30 different scientific papers from this project, but you find 2 of the thesis references down here to the left, and I will explain some of the results for you. And based on the engine experiments, we can then move into optical diagnostics, so that's also an experimental technology. And that type of research is extremely important to explain what actually happens in this very novel type of combustion. We have an advanced combustion concept. We're using a new fuel, methanol, that is not researched that much. And if you look at the film here, I hope it's working. Yes, it's working. You can see the fuel sprays coming out, and they behave differently than diesel injection, for instance. And then we have a combustion ongoing. We see a flame propagation here. And we can look at it again. And if you look at the upper right corner, you can see it's a sort of a dust speck moving about there. And bam, there it goes. So it's in combustion there. And that demonstrates the surface ignition sensitivity of methanol, which is a bit special as well. And also we learn a lot more about the lean out ignition process and so many different things. And all of that is so important to have the ability to create models of these engines and this type of combustion. And I will show you about that here. And here we see another projection of the combustion chamber. We're looking from the side. So this is known as CFD. This is advanced modeling. So we see the methanol PPC type combustion here. And by the use of our engine experiments and optical diagnostics, we can tailor and calibrate this model and improve them. So we learn much more about what's actually happening inside the combustion chamber. For instance, temperature distributions is very hard to measure, but that is fairly easy to calculate if you have calibrated the model properly. And these models are very important for the virtual engine development for even higher efficiencies and lower emissions than the companies will typically work with. And the right upper figure is one example of how we made numerical experiments with 3 different combustion systems for methanol combustion to see if we can lower the heat transfer losses and improve the efficiency further. And once we find a good candidate there, we can take it down to the workshop, we can machine new pistons, and we put it into our experimental facilities and investigate further if that was a good step or not. And that's also very valuable for the industries, so they know how to design the future methanol engines. all included, methanol seems to be the cleanest and most efficient fuel we research at our laboratories in Lund. And I believe that the methanol's unique properties of this high heat of vaporization and ignition resistance will continue to give an edge over future diesel and gasoline engines. There are two figures here. The left figure shows the efficiency and the soot emissions. So the y-axis has the gross indicated efficiency, the x-axis is the soot emissions. So you want to be in the upper left corner here. And the arrow points on the methanol PPC results, so the best of those fuels we really tried, much better than diesel engines. And also ethanol is behaving similarly, so it's a good match between methanol and ethanol in this particular case. On the right figure, we have the hydrocarbon CO emissions combined on the y-axis. On the x-axis, we have the NOx emissions. And it's good to be in the lower left corner within this figure. And you can see that the methanol PPC, very, very low emissions. And if you use a three-way catalyst, you can improve it even further. But it's already extremely low emissions. You can compare that with the SECA limits. You find a green box in the figure there, and also an old marine diesel type engine. And looking at dual fuel concepts, they are usually pretty crappy when it comes to hydrocarbon emissions. So just give you an idea of how good it is possible to operate with methanol in combustion engines. So coming to the summary, needs and opportunities. Methanol engines are already in use and demonstrate high efficiency and low emissions. There's clearly potential for exceptional efficiencies, and we have hardly scratched the surface. The needs, as we see it, we need to have robust fueling systems and dedicated injectors for the different combustion strategies for methanol operation. We need a lot of further research and development, for instance, into the opportunities of dedicated methanol engines with very high efficiency, flex fuel engines that can operate on ethanol and methanol, for instance. And also the retrofit kits that Sebastian has already mentioned. And I would like to point to the right figure here at the work machinery sector or the agriculture machinery sector. Obviously, those should run on the waste from their own produce, clean and efficiently. So we have a great opportunity in that particular sector as I see it. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I would like to thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer all your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Martin. So let's see what we have in terms of questions. So a question on the MD95 concept, where the question is on the effect of the ignition improver. So adding in this 5% of ignition improver, do you know how it affects emissions like soot and formaldehyde?
Yeah, that's an important and good question. When the methanol, the 100% neat methanol, that reduces soot altogether. But when it comes to when we add ignition improvers or other types of additives, they are introducing a risk for increasing the soot emissions from the engine. So that's a trade-off we have to deal with in that particular case. Regarding the formaldehyde emissions, that doesn't seem to be an issue with the MD95 concept.
Yeah. Thanks. We have another question concerning, well, the longevity, let's say, of the engine. So any ideas on engine wear and tear when it has run a number of hours on methanol? Do you see differences in terms of abrasive particles that would decrease the durability of the engines, or the opposite?
I think that's also a very important and valid question. If you go back some time in history, when we were using spark-ignited engines with carburetors and methanol, then you could form formic acid in the combustion chamber of the remaining fuel residues when the engine cooled down, and that could lead to corrosion in the engine. This is not an issue with modern engine technology and controls, and especially with direct injected engines. Regarding the abrasiveness, methanol is a so-called dry fuel, so you need to have some sort of lubricative additive for the combustion chamber.
Then a question on compression ignition operation on pure methanol, where of course the challenge is to get the methanol to auto-ignite. So what ways are there to reach a temperature that actually induces ignition of the hard-to-ignite methanol?
Another very good question, an important question also, and it's right that methanol is a hard fuel to ignite, and you need to have a high temperature to do that. You can realize that by using a spark, for instance. That really helps. If you're using compression ignition like we do in the PPC case, you need to increase the inlet temperature or have a higher compression ratio that gives the conditions. So we need to rethink a little bit in terms of conventional engines like diesel engines and gasoline engines. And that's where we have the opportunity with the dedicated methanol engines.
And then a question on the video you showed, was that indeed an example of PPC, of partially premixed combustion on methanol?
It was. Yeah,
okay.
It was.
So that's a short and clear answer. And then you showed this overview comparing a number of different fuels in terms of emissions and efficiency. And there, E85 was shown not to be that great as NOx emissions. Was that correct, or was that a misrepresentation? Or maybe we can go back to that
I think
slide.
we should go back to the figure there and look at it clearly. Obviously, we didn't have that much time to go through, but I guess the question comes from the upper right corner of the right figure. You see E85 diesel dual fuel. And the E85 in that particular case was port fuel injected, and then the diesel was direct injected as an ignition fuel. And with port fuel injection, you can have this fuel trapped in the crevices in the combustion chamber. And if you have not tailored the system completely towards that, you can have very high NOx emissions and hydrocarbon emissions as well. An E85 dedicated engine, as we have seen on the market before, they don't have these problems because they run stoichiometric conditions and then use a three-way catalyst, so they are very clean.
Maybe one quick final one, because I think that's an important one at all. Methanol, is that now soot-free? In the sense, could you be able to run a methanol engine, Euro 6 road transport, and get away with a particle filter? Would that be feasible?
There was a figure that I didn't show, but I will have that figure in the slides that we will distribute after this day. And according to what we've seen in our laboratory, soot is not really a problem at all. So from that perspective, with the current regulations, it's Euro 6 compliant. But we do see small particulates originate. They are liquid core particles. They look really funny. We have filmed them. We have photos. 20 nanometer size they are. And they originate from the lubricating oil in terms of the calcium, the sulfur, and things like that exist in the oil. Very, very large, small amounts, but large numbers of these particles. But that's also because we're using a diesel engine base. The piston rings are really not adapted for that type of operation. So I think it's a technical problem that can be relatively easily solved.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I think we will close it here. Thank you once again, Martin.
Oh, thank you very much.